Hi, physiology students. This is chapter 15, and we're going to divide it into two parts. We'll get through about half of it tonight in today's lecture that I'm recording, and then we'll get over the second half of it on Thursday when we come back together and meet. So the endocrine system overview, that your endocrine system acts with your nervous system to coordinate and integrate the activity of all of your body cells. And its kind of realm of influence is possible due to hormones, which are transported through the blood. The responses are slower, but they're longer lasting than your nervous system. And endocrinology is the study of hormones and the endocrine organs. So this is just a comparison of your nervous system and your endocrine system. And it's just a helpful review. Remember, your nervous system will initiate responses rapidly. They'll be short-lived. It acts via neurotransmitters, and your nervous system acts at specific locations determined by those axon pathways or tracks, and the neurotransmitters will act over very short distances. The endocrine system is kind of opposite to that, but again, the two work hand in hand to control body cells and their functions. Your endocrine system initiates responses more slowly as the hormones travel through their blood. There's longer duration responses. It acts via hormones, which are released into the bloodstream, and it will act at diffuse locations, which means that the targets can be anywhere the blood is able to reach. So hormone could be released from your thyroid gland, and it could travel through the blood to a body cell or a muscle cell all the way down in your leg. So the hormones will act over long distances. Here is what your endocrine system controls and integrates: reproduction, growth and development, maintenance of electrolyte, water, and nutrient balance of blood, regulation of cellular metabolism and energy balance, mobilizing your body defenses. And a reminder here, a review, an exocrine gland produces a non-hormonal substance like sweat and saliva, and it will release its product into ducts, which will take that secretion to the membrane surface, whereas endocrine glands that we're studying produce hormones and they do not have ducts. They release their products directly into the bloodstream. So these are your endocrine glands: your pituitary, your thyroid, parathyroid, adrenal, and pineal glands. Your hypothalamus is what we call a neuroendocrine organ because it combines the two body systems. Some glands have exocrine and endocrine functions, like your pancreas, your gonads, your placenta, what we'll talk about. And other tissues and organs that produce hormones are your adipose cells, thymus, and specific cells in the walls of your small intestine, stomach, kidneys, and hearts. So this is just a look at the location of selected endocrine organs throughout the body. The pineal gland is a P-shaped gland behind your hypothalamus that produces melanin, which controls your sleep-wake cycle. Then your hypothalamus controls the secretions from the pituitary gland. Here's your thyroid gland with the parathyroid glands on the dorsal aspect of it. Your thymus is involved in here. Your adrenal glands sit on top of your kidneys with your pancreas kind of in between. And then the gonads, your sex organs, the ovaries and testes. So the chemical messengers of your endocrine system are the hormones, which are long distance chemical signals. They'll travel in your lymph or your blood. Autocrines are chemicals that exert their effects on the same cells that secrete them. And a paracrine is locally acting chemicals that will affect cells other than those that secrete them. Autocrine and paracrines are local chemical messengers, and they're not considered exactly part of your endocrine system. There are two main classes of hormones. I just want you to know that there's two main classes, whether they're amino-based or steroid-based. Amino-based means they come from peptides and proteins and amino acids. And steroid-based mean they're synthesized from cholesterol. And that's all I want you to know. Though hormones circulate systemically, only cells with receptors for that hormone are affected. So hormones will circulate throughout the body system, but they'll only affect the target cells, which are the tissues with the receptors for a specific hormone. So hormones will alter the target cell activity only. So hormones are very specific for target cells only that have receptors that can bind to them. Hormone action on target cells may be to alter plasma membrane permeability, like opening and closing channels, stimulate a synthesis of an enzyme or a protein, activate or deactivate an enzyme, induce some sort of secretory activity, or stimulate mitosis or cell division. Hormones act in one or two ways, depending on their chemical nature and receptor location. They'll either be water-soluble hormones or lipid-soluble hormones. And if they're a water-soluble hormone, they cannot enter the cell. So they'll bind to receptors on the plasma membrane and kind of send in their signal through what we call protein second messengers, which will take in their signal into the cell for them. A lipid-soluble hormone can enter the cell, so they'll act on intracellular receptors that will directly activate genes. Blood levels of hormones are controlled by negative feedback systems, where the increased hormone effects on the target organs can inhibit further hormone release as the amount of hormone reaches its target level. Levels vary only within a narrow desirable range, and hormone release will be triggered by an endocrine gland stimulus or a nervous system modulation. So these are the three different stimuli, and kind of just briefly, I'll talk about these. A humoral stimuli, a neural stimuli, or a hormonal stimuli. And these are one of three stimuli that endocrine glands will be stimulated to synthesize and release hormones in response to. So a humoral stimuli is changing blood levels of ions and nutrients, which will directly stimulate the secretion of hormones. For example, your calcium levels in your blood. If your calcium levels decline or get too low, your parathyroid glands will secrete PTH, and parathyroid hormone will cause calcium concentrations to rise, and the stimulus will then be removed. So that's an example of a humoral stimuli. And there's a look at where the parathyroid glands are located on your thyroid gland. A neural stimuli involves nerve fibers, which are directly stimulating the hormone release. For example, the sympathetic nervous system fibers will stimulate the adrenal medulla to secrete catecholamines, which will be involved in the stress, the fight or flight response. So this is a look at the neural stimuli. Then the hormonal stimuli is when hormones will stimulate other endocrine organs to release their hormones. So for example, your hypothalamus will release hormones that stimulate the release of most of your anterior pituitary hormones. Your anterior pituitary hormones stimulate the targets to secrete still even more hormones. So this hypothalamic pituitary target endocrine organ feedback loop is just a type of feedback loop where glands secreting hormones will secrete other glands to secrete more hormones. And that's what hormonal stimuli is. And this is a look at kind of that feedback loop starting from hormonal release from the hypothalamus and then hormonal release from the anterior pituitary gland to its glands that will release even more hormones. The nervous system can make adjustments to hormone levels when needed. It can modify the stimulation or inhibition of endocrine glands. The nervous system can also override normal endocrine controls, such as under severe stress. Your hypothalamus and sympathetic nervous system will override insulin to allow blood glucose levels to actually increase to try to prepare your body for fight or flight. So the hypothalamus, we're going to go over in this part A, just kind of the anatomy, and then on Thursday we'll get to more of all the hormones and what they do. So the hypothalamus is connected to the pituitary gland via a stalk called the infundibulum, and your pituitary secretes at least 8 major hormones. It has 2 major lobes. Your posterior pituitary secretes neurohormones, and the anterior pituitary consists of more glandular tissue. The posterior lobe is neural tissue derived from a downgrowth of the brain. So it maintains a neural connection to the hypothalamus via the hypothalamic hypophyseal tract. And your posterior pituitary secretes 2 hormones, your oxytocin and ADH. The hormones are stored in axon terminals in the posterior pituitary gland and then are released into the blood when neurons fire. So this is just a look at how oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone are released, but how the hypothalamus is directly connected to the posterior pituitary via this neural connection of neurons. Then the anterior lobe is more glandular tissue, and it's vascularly connected to the hypothalamus, meaning there's blood vessels that connect your hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary gland. Your hypothalamus will secrete releasing and inhibiting hormones to your anterior pituitary to regulate hormone secretion, and that's just shown here. So, I mean, big picture here, I just want you to know that blood vessels connect your hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary, and you can see these 7 hormones listed here. And a neural connection will connect your hypothalamus to your posterior pituitary. So the posterior pituitary just, again, it consists of axon terminals, which will release oxytocin and ADH. They're almost identical hormones, but they just differ in 2 amino acids, which is interesting. Oxytocin is a strong stimulant of uterine contractions released during childbirth. It also acts as a hormonal trigger for milk ejection. Both are positive feedback mechanisms, meaning you'll continue to produce oxytocin to further increase uterine contractions until the birth of the baby, and oxytocin will continue to be released until milk will be ejected from the mammary glands. Then ADH is antidiuretic hormone. If concentrations are too high of these solute concentrations that the hypothalamus will be able to undertake or be able to keep up with via osmoreceptors. If concentrations of solute concentrations get too high, the posterior pituitary is triggered to secrete antidiuretic hormone, which basically tells your kidneys to reabsorb more water to inhibit or prevent urine formation. The release is also triggered by pain, low blood pressure, and drugs. So if you have extremely low blood pressure in your body, antidiuretic hormone will be released to try to absorb more water to increase blood pressure. It's inhibited by alcohol and diuretics. So that's why when you drink a lot of alcohol, you urinate very frequently, because alcohol inhibits antidiuretic hormone. High concentrations will cause vasoconstriction. So antidiuretic hormone is also called vasopressin. So this is just a great chart to review the 2 hormones that come off of the posterior pituitary gland, their function and their target organ. Some homeostatic imbalances to these hormones. Diabetes insipidus is ADH deficiency, usually due to damage to the hypothalamus or the posterior pituitary gland. So if you're not producing enough antidiuretic hormone, which normally retains water, a deficiency of ADH would cause you to lose water and frequently urinate. That's why insipidus, that word means empty, and we connect it with diabetes because diabetes mellitus, another telltale sign of diabetes mellitus, is also frequent urination. So you must keep the patient well hydrated for diabetes insipidus. A syndrome of inappropriate ADH secretion. So too much ADH secretion would be a retention of fluid, headache, disorientation, fluid restriction. So that's how we would take care of a person with this syndrome. You would try to get them to not drink as much and just monitor their sodium levels. And then we'll get through the 6 hormones of the anterior pituitary. All but growth hormone will activate target cells via a second messenger. All but 2 are trophic hormones that regulate the secretions of other hormones. I just want you to know really well what these 6 hormones are. And for some reason I had 7. Sometimes they include a melanocyte one, but that isn't here. So these are your 6 hormones of the anterior pituitary. Your growth hormone is also called somatotropin. It has direct actions on metabolism and indirect growth promoting actions. The direct actions on metabolism, it decreases the rate of cellular glucose uptake and metabolism. It triggers the liver to break down glycogen into glucose, and it increases blood levels of fatty acids for use as fuel and encourages cellular protein synthesis. So it encourages the synthesis of proteins, indirect actions on growth. And I'll pause here